Today, we're talking about surrogacy and the legal side of growing a family through this process. Fedor, I don't think a lot of people realize how legally intensive it can be. So, tell us about what the legal steps are involved with this journey.
Well, it's more of a contract law, and really surrogacy all kind of develops around the contract law. You have to understand what surrogacy is to begin with. Surrogacy is when you have a baby and you have a mother, a surrogate mother, who would carry this baby for you as a family or for you as a couple, or sometimes even if you are a single parent, you want to be a single parent. So all sorts of contracts and all sorts of insurance and all sorts of things of that nature is involved. And if you think, and that's what makes it very complicated. If you think, what can you possibly think about? It's, be as thorough and protected as you can possibly be. So you have to have a contract with the mother. You have to have a contract with the clinic also that's going to help you to do that. You have to have an agreement even with your spouse or your significant other, because if you think about it, the biological aspect is kind of removed from it. So the biological aspect is more now with the surrogate mother, and now you as parents still qualified as a biological parents. And remember, if a child is born in Illinois during the course of the marriage, is still presumed to be your child. Now, remember also, there is nothing, any contract that you can possibly think about, people usually break those contracts, and nothing is bulletproof. Like former CEO of McDonald's said that the contracts are made to be broken, and that's why we go to court. People think that by signing a contract they have an absolute proof or right to something. It's not true. A contract is a piece of paper that gives you legal rights, legal steps. So, but you have to make it. You have to put something on the paper. So later, if something happens, you can go to court and explain to the judge or a trier of fact or the other side or the other attorney what you really want to do.
So, I'm seeing that it sounds like that is such an important part of why parents should work with. Intended parents should work with attorneys. So, what do you think that the biggest misconceptions are about surrogate law that they're seeing?
The biggest misconception about surrogate law is that if you think that you have a surrogate mom and this is going to be your child, that you automatically 100% have rights to this child. The mother can change her mind, and that's what makes it complicated, because a lot of mothers, there are a lot of samples and there's a lot of case law about it. When the mother who's carrying the child gets attached to the child, and especially when the pregnancy is a difficult one and the birth is complicated, the birth of the child, she might get attached to the child and she might later claim the rights to this child or even visitation rights, because there are different levels of custody, decision making, visitation rights, and things like that. And that's why you have to have contracts. Uh, and there are multiple contracts. Contract with the mom. You can have a prenuptial agreement with your spouse or significant other. You should have a contract with the clinic, and you should have all sorts of insurance coverages for the mother who's carrying the child, for the clinic, for the, what if she did gave birth and there's something wrong with the child, because that happens a lot too. Parents anticipate, and I think this is a very wrong way to approach it. Nobody can guarantee the well-being of a child or how healthy the child is going to be. As a parent, you have to understand that you get in a life being that you will be responsible for. Now you get in a child with some kind of defect. Well, this is your child now, and you have to take care of that child. And what happens a lot, I should not say a lot, but what happens from time to time is parents anticipate to have an absolutely healthy child. They get a child, but the child is not healthy. Now, why the child would not be healthy? It could be that surrogate mother did not disclose that she has some kind of precondition before, and that's a part of the contract and that's a part of the insurance. But if there was a full disclosure made, and what happened, that the child has some kind of condition, then probably you're 100% responsible. But the mom can also carry responsibility if she didn't disclose everything.
Wow. It sounds so complicated.
It
And
is complicated, yes.
yeah, and so that would be even more reason for someone to begin with actually keeping these legal sort of processes in mind. Do you find that a lot of people are not, or do you think that people typically understand that, listen, this is the way that we start a process like this?
Well, I think the most of people have a basic knowledge and basic expectation
Mhm.
that is going to be something involved. They just don't understand how much.
Mm.
And there is really lots of things that involved.
Mhm.
You are 100% involved in the whole process with the mom. You go visit her. Besides of the compensation that she received, but you also want to make sure that she's healthy, that she's eating proper. And that's another kind of insurance that you need to have, that the mom doesn't have bad habits, that she's not drinking alcohol, obviously, or smoking cigarettes,
Mhm.
and things like that. And now we have, at the same time, we all have constitutional rights in
Mhm.
this country.
Mhm.
And the mom, what we're talking right now about is a contractual law, and constitutional rights always higher than any contract, and they govern the contract law. And the mom has certain constitutional rights herself. That's her life, and she can certainly have a life the way she wants to. But under the contract, she probably gives up some of the rights,
Mhm.
and then that's the question that comes up. If that happens a lot too, what people have to understand, they are committed. They're committed not only to have the child. It's not a pet. You're not getting the pet from the pet store.
Mhm.
Okay, you getting the child, and the child starts from the point of conception, and that's when you have to work with the mom. You cannot change your mind. You cannot say, I'm changing my mind. You can, and that's going to be a breach of contract, and that's what makes subsequent litigation more complex, when people change minds.
So, what documents do you find are the most important documents with this kind of surrogacy arrangement?
Well, I think insurance is very important.
Mhm.
There's all sorts of insurances there. There can be insurance for the baby. There can be insurance for the mother. There can be insurance for the clinic and
Mhm.
things like that. Uh, because if anything that happens later, we will still talk about some kind of money, some kind of compensation.
Mhm.
With the child, it's also important to understand what's going to happen with the child, how the whole thing will develop. Another thing that is very interesting is that you can never predict the future. And like I was just talking about, how the child can be born with some kind of defect, you can have twins, you know. So that is also something that has to be discussed in the contract, because you take in full responsibility. And again, that's something that has to do with DNA. There has to be a lot of tests to be done, and the mom has to disclose if she had anybody in her family who would have twins in the past and things like that, because it's additional burden to the family. It's maybe a happy burden. I hope that's
Mhm.
the way people look at it, but it could be additional burden.
Mhm.
So when we talk about that, we talk about multiple contracts, multiple agreements, and you should talk to um, clinic about all possible insurances that you can have
Mhm.
for this process.
Interesting. Wow. I didn't realize. I'm seeing now how complicated it is. So, what is a parentage order?
The parentage order is something that you get at the end of your custody battle.
Mhm.
You can either get it. So there are two types of orders in Illinois,
Mhm.
two types of process. One is if a couple is married and goes through divorce,
Mhm.
then you get what's called a vacation judgment, because we don't have any more custody agreements. in Illinois, and we don't have a notion of a custody by itself,
Mm-hmm.
we have what's called allocation judgment, decisions made on behalf of the children as far as education, extracurricular activities, um, health, and things of that nature. Also, we can have what you just mentioned, a parentage order. A parentage order is usually initiated by filing a petition for parentage. One of the parents can file a petition for parentage to say that I am the parent of this child and have some kind of proof. It's either that you are on the birth certificate, there's an acknowledgement from the other side, or you can show that you are a parent for this child. Now, you can be a biological parent or not a biological parent, but again, you establish the parentage. And usually you have to establish parentage when you're not married, because there is no presumption anymore that the child was born during the marriage. So that's when you can get a parentage order pretty much confirming that you are the parent of the child. Just because you get a parentage order does not necessarily mean that you have visitation rights or that you can make decisions on behalf of the child, things like that. That's, again, an allocation judgment that you still can get. So the parentage order is the first step to establish your rights towards the child.
Mm. And in situations where perhaps maybe there is no biological sort of affiliation to the child, and maybe like a same-sex marriage or something like that, is that why it would matter?
Well, in the same-sex marriage, you would have that presumption that the child that you are the parent of the child.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to have a father and mother. We're going to have parent number one and parent number two, but the child is presumed to be yours.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's just a presumption. There is a way to overcome the presumption, and the way you overcome the presumption to prove that this is not your child, for example, is that you have to provide records and things like that why you're not the parent for this child.
Mm-hmm.
As for relationship outside of the marriage, that is something that you have to file for, to have the parentage order and prove that you are the parent. Now, how can you do that? One of the ways to do that is present that contract that we were talking about, that you have a contract with the other side, and you have a contract with the clinic, and you have a contract with the surrogate mother, that you are one of the parents for this child. There has to be an acknowledgement. A big deal, a huge deal, is to have the child's name, is to have your name on the birth certificate of the child. Mm. So if you really want to prove that this is your child, you have to have your name on the birth certificate of your child. And this is something that you can do in a hospital. Mm-hmm. And this is something that you absolutely must do in a hospital, especially in the picture of a surrogacy, when there's a surrogate mother with the child, and you as two parents come in and sign the birth certificate.
Interesting. So what happens when the child is actually born? From a legal perspective, of course.
Well, if the child is born, one of the things that you do need to do, of course, is to, like we just discussed, put your name on the birth certificate. And then after the child is born, there will be some kind of follow-up procedure, of course, with the mom. We have to, you have to check on the health of the child, the child's needs, how to feed the child, things of that nature. But that's something that you usually discuss with the surrogate mother during the course of the whole procedure. Another thing is that the surrogate mom, it's preferable, should have a separate lawyer, or at least a person who would review the agreement. So, for example, if we talk about prenuptial agreements or postnuptial agreements in the state of Illinois, you should have two lawyers. So one lawyer would create the agreement, and the other side should give it to a different attorney, at least for review, not necessarily, to pay for the whole process. Same here. So there is no conflict of interest for a lawyer, for a surrogate parent, and for the parents. Any agreement should be reviewed by moms, by surrogate parent attorney. Anything that can happen in the process, you can always amend, you can always negotiate, you can always discuss. But at some point, people also discuss how much the surrogate mother will be involved with the child, and at what point you kind of cut the cord, so to say,
right,
and she's completely removed from the picture, and you go on with the child as the family.
Mm. So, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you're seeing when people start to begin this journey?
Oh, it's hard to say, but there are a lot of presumptions that people kind of think that they are entitled to, and there is nothing about entitlement. So it's like you like I said, the two things that you can't change your mind, and this happens all the time in the society. You know, even when you go buy a house, you make a down payment and then you change your mind. But we're talking about the house, we're talking about the property. Here with the child, you, even though if you make upfront payment, whatever the terms of the agreement, uh, you can't really just change your mind in the middle of a pregnancy. Again, I said that you can, but that's the mistake that people make, because now she's pregnant with the child and you have to either go through abortion or whatever the decision can be. That's on one side. On the other side, there can be no presumption that the child will be absolutely healthy. It's not a product we buy on the shelf,
Right.
from the shelf,
Mm-hmm.
and you will get a person, a live human being with whatever health conditions, healthy or not, and you have to. This is your parental responsibility from that point, and you cannot presume that you have 100% rights right away, because she's still a surrogate mother. She still can, again, usually it doesn't happen, but there are cases when surrogate mother trying to claim the pregnancy later on, and surrogate mother is also sometimes is obligated, kind of. And again, when I say obligated, it's contractual law
Mm-hmm.
to be involved in the life of the child if there's a rare blood type,
Oh.
or it has to be a medical procedure. Who would they go to? The DNA pretty much owners.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the DNA owners, even though the DNA is in, they can be two DNAs that the surrogate mother carries on, she still might be required to be involved later on in any medical procedures.
So, what are her rights, or their rights to, during the surrogate mother's rights?
She she has contractual rights.
Mhm.
She has rights again under insurance,
Mhm.
in case things go wrong or things like that.
Mhm.
She doesn't really have any rights that would belong to the biological parent of the child. I wouldn't say she has, in a rare situations that, again, it has to be discussed in the contract law, because that's the area where you talk about the contract law and you talk about the um, family law as far as the custody and things like that. But her rights mostly are viewed before the birth of the child, because she, if the pregnancy becomes complicated, if there's a danger to her health and things like that, she has a right, not to endanger herself,
Mhm.
and she has a right to certain medical procedures, medical treatments, and things of that nature.
Mhm.
So these are main rights that she has as a person. Now, as a rights as a mother to the child, she doesn't really have much.
Hmm. So, are there situations where legal issues could actually delay parenthood?
Well, it's difficult to say. Can you come up with with a circumstance where the legal procedures can actually delay parenthood? You can.
Mhm.
It's not likely, um, but things happen. So it happens if it's all about consent, it's all about the agreement, and it's all about the intent of the parties. Well, the
Mhm.
intent of the parties at the time of the creation of a life is to have a family,
Mhm.
and that's the usual intent. If you take a biological parents and a traditional family who have a child with the intent to have a life and live happily after, that's the intent. But then life happens and intent kind of changes. The same goes with this kind of procedure. So the intent initially is to have a family. So what can happen is that one of the parents can change his or her mind and say, well, I don't want to go through this procedure. The other parent can still, insist because that was the initial intent, and then claim later, deal with the custody issues, things like that. If you think about it, again, in terms of, you take a parallel with the traditional family, it happens sometimes too. People decide to have a family, and during the pregnancy, they decide to get divorced. It's unlikely, but it happens. So at the time of the when the person have a child, they can be actually divorced already, but that doesn't change the laws of custody, and that this parent can claim or demand from the other side child support. That's actually also a very interesting issue that the parent have to realize. Going back to your question about the things that people don't understand, it's all about commitment, and you are responsible for this life, and you have to pay child support, and you have to pay any child-related expenses, and maybe you have to pay for this child's college and things like that. So you need to think really upfront what you're going to do.
Right. So do you find that these surrogacy laws, they differ from state to state?
Well, in our society and in this country, laws are different. The embryos laws are different from state to state. Surrogacy is more like more common because it deals with the contracts, and contracts kind of it's, I would say, pretty much the same law in every state. It all has to do with the consent, intent, with offer, consideration, all these things. But the custody laws at the end, because at the end of the day, you still talk about custody, you still talk about child support, still talk about parents and rights that the parents have. That is different. California is a very different state from everybody else. Illinois is kind of in the middle, but states like California, New York, and Florida, they might view it completely different. So what's interesting, I just mentioned these three states. California and Florida are the most favorable states just because of its very nature, because of the weather, because of other conditions that involve. So people, the clinics and people go there to have a birth for the child because they want to take care of the surrogate mother. They want her to be exposed to sunshine and be just happy in general for the good birth of a child.
Yeah. Interesting. So what challenges do these intended parents mostly face when it comes from a legal perspective?
They don't really, if everything goes smooth and if nobody changes her mind and life goes on. But again, the thing is that, and I think this is just the way the person's mind work. If you have a child traditional way and you have a traditional family, you kind of accept right away. It's mostly like automatic that you have this responsibility, and you cannot get rid of him. You can in various, again, rare circumstances that I really don't want to discuss, but you can. With the child that comes from surrogacy, I don't think there is this conception, and people can become disabled or or something happens, and then at that point they think about themselves more than think about anybody else, and that's when they change. So if you think about it, that sometimes parents that go through surrogacy, I can only draw a parallel with adoption, which is a completely different animal, but that's how they sometimes perceive, even though it's your DNA, comparing to adoption, but they still look at it in terms of, I still can change my mind. Unless that happens, it's pretty much, the same law of the state where the child is born.
So how important is it to work with and I'm differentiating between professional and experienced professional. Like what's the difference between the two, and how is it important? Like, why is it important to work with somebody who has good experience with this?
When you say good experience, professional, we're talking about lawyers, or you're talking about
Lawyers, yeah.
lawyers? Well, it's always good to work with somebody who has extensive experience in the area. If we work with this type of cases frequently, but if you ask from the legal perspective, we do a lot of litigation. So once a lawyer gets involved in a thing like that, in the contract, in the creation of a contract, this lawyer sort of disqualified later to represent a client during the litigation procedure because of the conflict of interest. So but the knowledge of the law and the way it works out later in courts is very important when you work with a contract and a particular person that you work with, and the circumstances that you work with this person, and with kind of envision what could be an issue. It's always a problem. So the lawyer's job is to give a client options. We don't make decisions for clients. We give them options, and the client makes the decision the way to go. Okay. So experience would play a lot of role.
Yeah, definitely. Have you ever seen, if I try to think about it, I mean, to handle something like this kind of a scenario, like informally, would be just, for me, I'd be, oh no, I don't know about that. But have you ever seen someone, or do you find people that handle these situations with regards to surrogacy informally, and then do they face like serious repercussions later on?
I think it's always next to impossible to do this informally.
Yes.
If I assume what you're saying is that they go within, they make a decision within,
like an aunt or hey, why don't you keep it in the family type of situation, or I don't know, like
it's kind of hard to do, I think, from the practical point, because you still have to go through some kind of process, because you still have to have your DNA implemented into a surrogacy mom. So once you go to a clinic, a clinic might even decline doing anything like that without a good legal background, legal support, I should say. And the clinics also have a lot of lawyers that would guide you through this. Informally, I think it's a huge mistake. B, it's always impossible to do. And C, from the legal perspective, to claim the parental rights later on is going to be extremely difficult.
So do you find that there are, and this is figure of my ignorance, I'm just asking, is, so are there individuals that are dedicated to being surrogates? You can't just choose somebody off the street type of, you wouldn't just, is there like a kind of like an institution when it comes to something like this?
Yeah, you work with the clinic, and then you obviously have a chance to talk to the potential surrogate parent, surrogate mother. You interview her. She also talks to you. So it's all about communication. You can bring somebody from, again, we talk about, there's a lot of insurance involved that kind of monitors all of this thing. So you can't just take somebody from the street and say, hey, I want her to do that. Whoever is a candidate for this, she will get a compensation, but she needs to comply with certain things, and she has to qualify pretty much. So she has to go through a lot of tests, things of that nature.
Interesting. Okay. So what should people look for when actually choosing a surrogacy attorney?
Again, it depends how you approach it. A lot of people have their family attorneys, so they can go there, somebody that they trust to begin with. And then that attorney would probably refer them to a specific clinic that he or she works with. Some people go through the clinic first, and then the clinic would refer them already to the attorney on the staff. Again, when we talk about this thing, it's all about liability and responsibility. And again, it's in a huge insurance industry.
Mhm.
And just like if you think about any other insurance, insurance wants to have their lawyers uh, create contracts
Mhm.
and represent the insurance so they protect their interests. Insurance doesn't want to pay in case something goes uh, south.
Mhm.
So a lot of those lawyers work with the insurance. But like I said, there always can be a private lawyer involved in things like that. Um, Especially for surrogate mother,
Mhm.
she might decide to have her own attorney just so we avoid the potential conflict of interest and things like that.
Interesting. Okay, so last question before we go. What advice would you give to a family that is just beginning in their surrogacy journey?
Do a lot of research. I would say, speak to different clinics,
Mhm.
talk to lawyers just to get basic understanding of what's going to happen. There are a lot of, there's a digital age, so there's a lot of videos out about it. There's a lot of other things. Try to, you know, all this information is obviously confidential, and people go through surrogacy, and that's a lot of people don't want to know others about, what's going on. But some are very open,
Mhm.
and I would highly, advise or encourage to talk to other people who went through this process and they know what are they talking about and they can relate it from the inside
Mhm.
how this whole process works.
Interesting. Well, thank you so much for
You're
all
welcome.
of this wonderful information. Appreciate your time.
Of course.